It is the feast of Christ the King, Lord of the universe, but also it's the last Sunday in the church year. So next Sunday is going to be the first Sunday of Advent, which is funny. I mean, I don't know. Whenever we get to the end of a church year and into a real year, it's good because it's the end. It's fine. But then, here's December 1st, New Year's Eve, and then there's January 1st, and then January 2nd, and then, you get the end of the week, and then tomorrow's Monday, and you just start anew. And so it seems like one of those things where we could say, oh, it's the end of the year, so it's the end. And yet we're kind of still in it. Like, we're kind of still in life. Life just keeps on moving. And so we still have to do all the same things like, school's not over yet for us, and for you, work's not over yet, and you're probably in the middle of like whatever relationships you have going on right now, and all in the middle of all the struggles and all the anxieties. And sometimes, like in the middle of all these things, we do want to know. We want to be at the end. I want to know how it ends, because it's sometimes really nice. We talked about it last weekend. The end reveals what kind of story we're living in. And so sometimes I think we want to skip to the end or skip to the good part. We want to, in the midst of not knowing, in the midst of life, I think that we can have so many anxieties. We have so many worries, so many stresses, because it's just like, I don't know how it's going to work out. And so there's this thing in us, I think, that here's this relationship. I don't know, it's really tough. Is it going to work out? Or here's I'm looking for this job. I really want this thing. I don't know if it's going to work out. Or here's, again, my children are sick, or someone in my family is sick. I don't know how it's going to work out. Or I'm sick. I don't know how it's going to work out. I don't know how it's going to end. And we have this thing in us that says, if I just knew, I think that if I just knew how it was going to work out, then I'd be okay. Like, it doesn't even have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be fine. I think if I just knew how it would end, then I would be okay. Of course, the hard part is you don't get to. We don't get to know. The hard part is that while, yes, as human beings, we have agency, like we have free will, we get to affect our lives, we get to make decisions, we get to make choices. There is so much in our lives that we can't control. And so the question is, what do you do with that? I mean, go back to relationships. There's so much unknown. Like there's so much we can't control. Like a person can't control whether, when, or if they even meet somebody. There's so much beyond our control. Like, I can't control that. A person can't control whether the person that they likes them back. Or even if they are dating. You can't control whether or when or if there'll be a proposal. And I have seen people try to do that. Like, I've actually met people who are trying to control the proposal. And it rarely works out, because I think a lot of that is rooted in fear. I think actually so often this desire for control is rooted in fear. It's either the fear of losing what I have, or it's the fear of not getting what I want to have. So I just want to control this. And the question, of course, is what do we do in those moments? Like, what do we do when we encounter a life we can't control? Like, what do we do when we encounter a future that we can't control? The big question is this: what do we do when we encounter a God that we can't control? Because that's the reality. That's a God I can't control. That's the unsettling thought. That's the unsettling reality that stretches out over our entire lives. That our God is a God I can't control. Which makes sense. I mean, if I can't control life, if I can't even control another person, I for sure can't control God. So what do we do? Well, let's pause for that for a second. I don't know if you know this, but so feast today, Christ the King, of course, our Lord, Jesus Christ, King of the universe. This feast isn't that old. This feast is actually, it was established in 1925. So in 3 years, it'll be 100 years old. It is super recent. And Pope Pius XI was the one who established this feast. In fact, he did it for a purpose. He did it for a reason. In the 2,000-year history of the church, to have a feast that's not 100 years old yet, but is like universal and is celebrated, commemorated, and solemnized by everybody, that's kind of a big deal. Why did he do it? Because in the 1920s, he looked out at the world and he saw what we know was reality. I mean, he saw the rise of atheism throughout the entire world. He saw the rise of fascism in Italy. He saw the rise of communism in Russia. He saw the rise of National Socialism in Germany. I mean, think about this. Okay, think about fear. Think about control. Back to Germany. Consider Hitler's rise to power. Again, a kind of simplistic view of it, but it's pretty accurate. Is you have, after World War I, you have a hurting Germany. They have lost a sense of identity. They've lost a sense of pride. They've lost a sense of self. They're afraid. And again, what's the fear? The fear of losing what I have, the fear of not getting what I want to have. And along comes someone in the midst of that fear who says, I can fix it. Like along comes someone who says, I know what you're afraid of. If you hand me control, I can make it all better. And as a nation, not every individual, but as a nation, they handed over their soul to an authoritarian dictator. Which, of course, that's not saying anything about like Germans as a people. That's all of us. I mean, that's even us today. In fact, there was a survey in 2019 of citizens of England, and 54% of citizens in England in 2019 said that what Great Britain needed was a strong leader who wasn't afraid to break the rules. And only 54% agreed with that. Only 23% disagreed with that. Why? Because we get in this place of fear and like, wait a second, I need someone to take control, because that's what fear does. Fear either drives us to seize control, or fear drives us to cede control. Either we grasp it for ourselves or we give it away. I mean, this, again, that's not just Germans, that's not just Italy, it's not just that the Britons. This is us as well. I mean, think about, we just went through an election cycle and how much fear, how much control we're driven by. Because why? I need to get my person in there. And to get my person, I need to get the government, because what are they going to do? When they get in there, they're going to make it all better. So because of that, here, even in our country, fear can drive us to either try to seize control or to cede control. I mean, toward the end of his life, John Adams, he said he feared for our democracy. I've heard it noted by historians that democracies rarely, if ever, are actually ever toppled by an external force. And also, democracies rarely, if ever, are ever toppled from within, from like a coup. That rarely happens. Most often, if democracies fall, it's a death by suicide. Almost always, it's a free people that trades in their freedom for security. It's a free people that trades in their freedom for safety, and almost always ends up with it being the safety of slavery. Most often, it ends up being the security of slavery. And so Pope Pius the 11th, in the 20s, he saw what was happening. And he saw the human heart, and he knew, he didn't just see what was happening in Italy and in Germany and across Europe and here. He saw what was happening in Mexico. I don't know if you can picture what life was like in Mexico in the 1920s. So Mexico, we think of Mexico as a super Catholic country, and you'd be right. In the 1920s, 90% of Mexicans were Catholic. And not just kind of sort of Catholic. 90% of people, like the vast majority of them, were active Catholics. So this is a robust, lively Catholic country that in the 1920s had some politicians rise to power and made it illegal to practice the Catholic faith. These are people who were motivated by Marxist ideologies, motivated by Masonic prejudices, and basically, almost overnight, they made it illegal to practice the faith. Churches were shut down, convents and seminaries were shut down. You couldn't celebrate Mass, you couldn't celebrate the sacraments. Priests were forbidden from wearing like clerical garb out in public. In fact, if you were seen praying in public, you'd be fined or thrown in jail. And the government went so far as to even make it illegal to say things like adios, or si Dios quiere, which adios means to God, right? And si Dios quiere means if God wills it. So these things were illegal because the government, again, think about this. You're living in a Catholic country where everybody is Catholic, but some people come to power, and what do? Take it all away. It was to these people in the 1920s that Pope Pius XI was writing, and to us, right? Because what he's saying is there is no authority, there is no authoritarian government, no other person gives you your worth. That no other person, no other government gives you your dignity. Either a good government upholds it or a bad government violates it. But regardless, all of them are limited. Every ruler on earth is limited. Every government on earth must be limited, and every single one of them will topple and fall. And Pope Pius XI, on this feast day, he said, there's only one who has an absolute claim on your life. There's only one who has an absolute claim on any of us, and that's God, our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe. He went on to say, he said, therefore, you can't be timid in the face of authoritarianism. He said, we have to resist the fear that either seizes control or cedes control. That the one who promises peace at such a price as our freedom is a thief. Now, it's interesting, so many Catholics in Mexico heard Pope Pius's decree. They all knew about this feast of Christ the King. And many of them responded. Many of them responded not with timidity, they responded with courage. They first, of course, resisted peacefully, but at one point they recognized that here, as these soldiers, as the government was murdering, slaughtering nuns, slaughtering priests, slaughtering just ordinary Catholics who were just simply living out their faith, a group of them became the Cristeros. They were old men, they were old women, young men and young women. One of them was a boy, really, named Jose Sanchez del Rio. And Jose Sanchez del Rio was only 14 years old when he joined the Cristeros, which for us, we think that's so young. But for him, this was his life. For us, we can think like, are you kidding? Why would a 14-year-old join this? Because here in this world of chaos, here is this boy who recognized the truth. And the truth is, at some point, when you become old enough to stand up for your faith, when do you become old enough to become courageous? Jose, at 14, he was old enough to stand up for his faith. At 14, he was old enough to be courageous. At one point, he and his family, they prayed the rosary every single day in secret. They tried to attend Mass as often as they could, clandestinely. At one point, Jose, he gave up he had a horse, and the general of the Cristeros, his horse was knocked out from underneath him, so Jose gave him his horse and said, you're more important to the cause than I am. The general rode off, and Jose was captured. It was really interesting. The man who sentenced Jose to death was his godfather. The man who stood by him at his first communion a few years before this was the man who sentenced him to death. And he said he didn't want to do it. In fact, he tried to offer some bargains. He tried to get it so that he could be sent to the United States. He tried to get it so he could be sent to a military school. He even said that his family could pay a 5,000 peso ransom. Jose said, no, don't pay that. My faith is not for sale. Because he knew who he belonged to. He wasn't too young to be courageous. He wasn't too young to fight for his own faith. Late one night, about 8:30, the night of his death, the night he was murdered, the night he was martyred, the soldiers cut off the soles of his feet, and they forced him to walk for 3 hours until he got to his own grave. And before they stabbed him with bayonets and before they shot him in the head, Jose's last words were, Viva Cristo Rey. Long live Christ the King. For us, in that moment, in that whole season, we would be so afraid. Here is a young man who said, I'm not afraid. There was no place for fear. Why? What was in the place of control in Jose's life? What was in the place of fear in Jose's life? Like, what do we do in the face of a life, in the face of circumstances? What do we do in the face of a God that we can't control? Well, the answer is we trust. What do we do in the face of a God we can't control? Well, the answer is we surrender. And he asked the question, like, what does that look like? What does surrender look like? Does it look like giving up? No, it doesn't at all. For us, as Catholic Christians, for us, surrender is not giving up. Surrender is giving access. If Jesus is truly the Lord of the universe, giving him access means that he's also the Lord of my life. That surrender, truly saying, okay, I'm not going to control, I'm going to surrender. What it means is like, okay, God, I'm giving you access. All of my life is yours. You have access to every single part of me because I am yours. What do we encounter? What do we do when we encounter a God that we can't control? Think about other people. What do we do when you encounter someone you love but you can't control? Think about marriage. Because we have to ask the question, what does surrender look like? Not just, I got to give you access, but what does it practically look like? You know, in the old marriage vows, a man and woman would come before each other, and they would promise three things. They promised to love, makes sense. They promised to honor each other, which makes complete sense too. I mean, imagine, I love this. It's incredible. It makes so much sense even in our day and age. I promise to love you. I promise to honor you. But there was a third promise, and that promise was, I promise to love, honor, and obey. Which for us in 21st century, we're like, yeah, I'm glad they changed that because it sounds so foreign, but it's absolutely so necessary. In the kind of relationship where I realize you're my wife, you're my husband, I cannot control you. What do I have to do? I have to do what St. Paul said to the Ephesians. He said, husbands and wives, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. To submit to one another, what does that mean? Submission means I'm placing myself under your mission. If I place myself under someone else's mission, I had better be ready to do what they asked me to do. If I'm placing myself under someone else's mission, I'd better be ready to do what they're asking me to do. Because that's why, if you ask, like, what does surrender look like practically? It means obedience. If it comes to the point of like, okay, what do I do in the face of a world I can't control? What do I do in the face of a God I can't control? The answer is, I obey him. And if I don't obey the Lord, King of the universe, then I haven't surrendered to him. If I don't obey him, then I don't belong to him. If I don't obey him, then he might be the Lord, he might be the king of the world, he might be the king of the universe, but he is not the king of my life. And this feast was established, not for political reasons, well, yes, it was, but mostly for personal reasons, because here's the Pope not calling people to arms. What he's calling them to say, okay, if I belong to Jesus, then here's what I have to do. I have to love and honor and obey him. In the place of control, I surrender. That's one of the reasons why when I'm talking to like couples getting ready to get married, to highlight this injunction from St. Paul, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Place yourself under the mission of the other person. If I can't see myself placing myself under their mission, then maybe I need to press the brakes a little bit. I need to pump the brakes and press pause. And ask the question, do I trust them? Because this is ultimately what it is. When it comes to Christ the King of the universe, do I choose fear or do I choose to trust? Do I choose control or do I choose obedience? And this is the last thing. I think sometimes when we're living our lives, we say, I think that if I knew how it would turn out, then I would be okay. But as we said, life is such that you don't get to know, that we don't get to be in control. And so we have a king that we can't control. And we have a king on a cross. Why is he on the cross? He's on the cross to let us know that while he is the king of the universe, while he has dominion, he doesn't dominate. That while he is a God that we can't control, he is a God that we can trust. And on this feast of our Lord Jesus Christ, King of the universe, in the face of fear, in the face of the desire to control, we get to choose. We get to choose obedience over control. And we get to choose trust over fear.